What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I am back with yet another album review. First off, going to be going solo this weekend. Shred has some family obligations that he needs to attend to, and Jammin' John underwent a lot of dental surgery, and it's going to be a little while before he comes back, so I'm going to make sure he has time to recover. But either way, we've entered October. Spooky season is officially started, and I wanted to kick it off with one that I've been anticipating for a while, and a band that generally delivers a lot of the spooky. So we're going to go over the latest offering from Hooded Menace, Lachrymose Monuments of Obscuration. This comes out on the 3rd of October on Season Mist Records. This band formed in 2007 in Finland. This is their 7th album overall. I have been into this band since Never Crossed the Dead, which I see as kind of like a death doom sort of like hallmark album. That album, coupled with a lot of incantation, is kind of one of the reasons I became like a big death doom fan. We bring up this band quite a bit. We went over their last album, The Tritonus Bell, which was a fantastic release and definitely marked a shift in this band's sound, which that album definitely made me more curious about this one in terms of how they were going to follow it, because Tritonus Bell introduced a lot of elements that were not a big part of this band's sound overall. More up-tempo rhythms, stuff that is less, flat-out death doom, and maybe stuff that is a little bit more akin to bands like Merciful Fate or King Diamond. They did have Andy LaRocque do the production on there, and he did a marvelous job. And I would say Tritonus Bell, especially after listening to this one, is definitely a transitional album, because this one pushes even further in the direction that Tritonus Bell was heading. Almost to the point where it's kind of hard for me to call this death doom anymore. Like, this is kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of different things, but a lot of different things that really work. Now, this band has been introducing different elements in their sound, especially more melody over the course of their existence. Ossuarium Silhouettes Unhallowed was probably the most melodic offering in terms of their straight up death doom sound before Tritonus Bell kind of took off into different territory. But this new album here is kind of far removed from either one, almost to the point where it sounds like a different band. First, I want to talk about the production here. Now, they didn't have a big name in here, unless this guy's a big name in Finland, and I can't say for certain. His name is, and forgive me, Heikki Marttila? Maybe I got that right? Either that or I just named off some Finnish traditional drink that involves bear blood or something like that. Either way, the production on here is probably the most lush I have ever heard from this band. This album has a big 80s sound. The guitars are not like the thick, giant rumbling guitars that you expect, at least in terms of their past efforts. They are, I don't want to call them thinned out, but they have more of a classic 80s ring on here. I'll be honest, the production here sounds kind of similar to the production on Ozzy's Ultimate Sin. It's not quite that apparent in the intro Twilight Passages. You do get to hear the synths in there. They sound very lush, very 80s, but also, very dark. They're not necessarily super bright. They kind of hang around the middle there in terms of creating a good solid hook that you can hum along to, but one that's also a little bit dark and dreary. But when you get into Pale Masquerade, which is the first single in here, the drums come in. They have a more lush kind of 80s sound to them. Very warm bass, and the guitars really start to take over. It sounds kind of like an Ozzy album, or like a King Diamond album, or Merciful Fate. Or if you wanted something a touch more modern, maybe Tribulation. It's got this kind of gothy texture to it. The riffs are still heavy, they're still chuggy, there's lots of big 80s guitar harmonies all over here. And the riff work does sink down into doomier, more ominous territory on songs like Daughters of Lingering Pain and Lugubrious Dance. But throughout this album, there are these giant dynamic shifts to just big 80s rock and 80s metal moments. Again, classic Ozzy stuff. There's even stuff on here that I would kind of loosely compare to Dokken. Not vocally, thank God. But in terms of some of the riff work, there's a lot of 80s rock and 80s metal all across here. And that makes for a lot of catchy riffs and catchy melodies on here. What this album doesn't necessarily have in terms of that purely just oppressive death doom weight, it kind of, supplants that with big gothic, dreary, melancholic hooks. There's big spooky synths on here. There's even like ghostly choirs that show up. There's even spoken word and a lot of really effective string work to add just like a little bit more melancholia. Portrait Without a Face in particular has some really awesome strings. There's a lot of like peaceful gothic death doom, a la like Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride, maybe even a little bit of Opeth, because these songs are still really long. These songs are still really dynamic. There's lots of cool riff changes, which was definitely an element in Trident's Bell as well. Just here, I feel like everything melodic and everything lush has been accentuated to the point where, again, this almost feels like a different band. It's hard to call this death doom because I don't think it is necessarily just death doom on here. It is a blend of a lot of different styles, but at the same time, I don't know if I would call it like progressive. You do have callbacks to their more death doom style, but you also have stuff that forges into very different territory, and those can happen in a quick transition, and I really like that. It goes from, again, like downtrodden, doomy, descending melodies to something that leads in with like, I mean, like a big 80s drum and bass stomp where it's just boom, boom, boom. You just hear the, bass drum thumping, and then it gets into like a big stomping riff that builds into a gallop, and just amazing leads across the board on here. Lugubrious Dance, Daughters of Lingering Pain, and Pale Masquerade all have those moments, and like the first thing I think of is like Ozzy or like, Dio-esque stuff on there. Lugubrious Dance in particular, I really dig that one because that kind of showcases a little bit of old and a little bit of what they're doing now. It's kind of sandwiched because it opens up with, lumbering, dreary riffs. The harmonies are sad. They are drenched in misery, exactly what I expected from this band. And then when you get to the bridge, it picks up into this like 80s gallop. It turns into dark montage rock. Like, instead of like Rocky working out in the winter, it's Satan working out in hell. And he's like surrounded by like demons, and they're fucking like cheering him on and, giving him a water bottle and shit like that. I don't know why he's training. Maybe Ivan Drago did die and go to hell and he has to fucking fight him. It completely has that vibe, and then it does bookend right back into the dark and dreary stuff, which kind of brings me to a point here that, I don't know, like this doesn't necessarily feel like a Hooded Menace album. It 100% is. Even the name doesn't necessarily apply to like what I'm hearing here. It doesn't sound shrouded in darkness. In fact, it kind of sounds like it's, I don't know, like dimly lit by soft neon lights at points. And I would even argue that it's more alluring than it is menacing, because these melodies really kind of draw you in. Like this just has a lot of solid, just flat out heavy metal hooks with like a little bit of a gothic texture to it. The vocals have even changed a little bit too, like they've kind of moved up a bit. And that isn't the only change in here. This is their first one as a three-piece, I believe. Or at least their first one as a three-piece in a long time, since Timo Hänninen actually departed, I believe, last year, or actually maybe the year before. But this is an album where I sense it could be like a tad divisive with some, especially if you go in with expectations of hearing stuff that is, more similar to their earlier work. You're still going to hear that stuff, but it's not the bulk of what's going on here. The last track might be probably the darkest track on here in terms of like, it stays a little bit more sinister and a little bit more oppressive into Haunted Oblivion. I definitely got some callbacks to like some of the earlier stuff, albeit like, again, it's a little bit more up-tempo. But a lot of this is, again, very lush, very pretty. I have to admit the cover of Duran Duran's Save a Prayer, I was not expecting that, but they did a solid job. It's kind of a good balance of a straightforward cover and a reimagining, because, I mean, they are a vastly different band than Duran Duran, but they add their dreary touch to it. They keep the vocals, harsh, growled, but the melodies are appropriately lush. They're just like a little bit darker. And I love Duran Duran and I love Rio, and I think they did a solid job there. But it also led me to think, you know what? There's room on this album, and maybe a solid argument that they could actually shift into like clean vocal passages every now and then and do it probably quite effectively. The music has changed enough with this band that they could probably make room for other dynamics that just wouldn't fit with their earlier sound. In terms of any negatives, I don't know if I really have any, other than, it's, again, like kind of vastly different than, well, even the last one. But there's nothing on here that I would say is bad. The harmonies all ring true. I love the lush production here. The guitar tone, might not be ideal for deathdoom at all. Like, this is probably the softest guitar tone they've ever had, but it's effective. It's got a good 80s crunch to it. It still sounds heavy. It still sounds ominous. It just doesn't sound like deathdoom heavy. There's enough callbacks to their earlier stuff in here, but I really do like what they're doing right now. It's just, again, I had some slightly different expectations, but still what I got was really good. So overall, I'm going to give this 4 stars. I think this is a really solid album. Again, it's a lot different than what I was expecting, and I was expecting something different after Trident and Spell. This is even very different from that one, and vastly different from Osorium Silhouettes and Hollowed, which is still probably my favorite album by them. But these songs are meticulously crafted. They have a lot of cool hooks, really awesome dynamics, and again, with the, kind of collisions between their old sound and their new sound, I think that makes these dynamics really stand out. The lead work in here is superb. I think the vocals are good. They are kind of one note for how, big the music is becoming. And I think you can make an argument for squeezing in some clean vocals to actually add to, the dynamics, because there's some melodies on here that, if you had, a solid kind of, gothic croon behind them, I think they would soar even higher. Or, for goths, dig the grave even deeper. Anyway, this is a pretty awesome listen. If you're a big fan of Hooded Menace, still, that sound's still here, but also, I'm just gonna say, Tribulation, Merciful Fate, King Diamond. Again, there's some stuff in here that reminds me of, Ozzy and Dio, too, and, a little bit of Opeth and Paradise Lost and My Dying Bride. Just kind of whirl all those bands together, and I think this is exactly what you're going to get. And in my humble opinion, I think that's pretty awesome. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships. They're only 99 cents, and our lone perk is doing a members-only live stream, which we will probably be doing sometime later this month. We'll definitely let you know in a community post. Either way, memberships are the main way to support the channel. And if you'd like to join up, there's a join button down there for you to hit, spit on, headbutt, drop an elbow on. Dealer's choice. Do whatever you want, just as long as it makes the little clicky join thing. Then you did it right. And of course, thank you guys for liking, subscribing, following, all that stuff. Tons of content coming your way. This month is going to be absolutely loaded with reviews. I'm also working on a bunch of other segments as well. We should have Shred back by next week, and hopefully John is healing up from all the dental work. He had a lot done, and that could definitely be difficult in terms of him speaking just in general and not in front of a camera. Either way, we're still going to overload you with as much content as we possibly can. So one more big thank you, because you guys are in fact awesome, and we will catch you later.